So I'm Prashanth, engineer at heart. I've been working with court data, US court data primarily, for over a decade now. I also work on related public data sets. Hopefully this presentation is interesting to you all, and I would love feedback at the end too. I co-founded UniCourt 8 years ago with Josh, who's now my CEO. And we primarily run the engineering out of India. We are about 140 engineers there and about 175 globally put together with all business operations. UniCourt is primarily a legal data as a service platform. And we provide real-time court access to lawyers and law firms. Our primary audience are AM 200 law firms in the US, and a lot of corporates and insurance companies who use legal data day in and day out. And the way they primarily access it is using APIs. So litigation analytics. So I'll start with what is litigation analytics. Okay. Being able to visualize litigation in the form of a knowledge graph and being able to query for information across cases through connected data points. This is how I would like to call litigation analytics. Okay. Now, I'm pretty sure everybody, all lawyers do research, or at least their associates do it for them. So litigation analytics is more of, you can think about it more of as a tool. Typically, you're used to doing text-based search on the data set that you internally have or the platforms that you use with. And in litigation analytics, typically the way you can think about it as another research tool, but the way you would go about doing your research is instead of just doing a text search for a party name or a lawyer name or a judge name or for a type of a matter, you can basically select entities from a list of entities, look at a macro view of things, and then probably drill down into what you're exactly looking for. Now, here, what are connected data points across cases? Lawyers, law firms, judges, parties, jurisdictions, courts, case types, outcomes, and motions. Right? Typically, these are called as connected data points that connect across cases. Okay. Now, I'll try to first explain what litigation analytics can help you do. Now, here, what you see on the screen is Robert Scott, an attorney. What practice areas does he typically have his expertise in? And here you'll see its contract is sort of the predominant one. You can also see the number of cases that he's handled over the time period. You can see the judges that the attorney has faced. And this attorney primarily practices in California. So you see the different courts that the volume of cases that the attorney has handled. So spread across courts. The same litigation and trends you can also see from a party perspective. Now, Amazon Inc. Here, Amazon, you'll see that is involved primarily in intellectual property cases. The number of cases that's filed, you'll see an upward trend. The judges that have seen Amazon's cases, and the practice area, the jurisdictions where Amazon, he's being sued or is filing a lawsuit. Right? This is at the federal court level in the US. So you'll see the spread all across with primarily in the East Coast. Okay. Another example of what litigation analytics can give, there are various things that can come, but I've just focused considering the audience from a lawyer's standpoint. What motions were filed by a lawyer? How long did it take to reach an outcome? Was the outcome a win or a loss? How does it compare with other lawyers? Now you can kind of drill down which are those specific cases that you want to see, which were the specific motions, the specific documents, and how many similar motions or documents resulted in similar outcomes. These are the kind of things that you can get to with litigation analytics. Now, let me talk a little bit about the process here. Okay. This is how you typically go about generating litigation analytics. So for any analytics to be generated, you need data. And the data comes from the source, and in this case, the source are the courts. Now, in the US, unlike in the morning panel how Dr. Karim was talking about a single app that kind of gets you all the information, in the US, it's every court has its own website. There are over 3,000 counties in the US, and each county has its court system. Most of them have their individual court websites. So data aggregation itself is a challenge. And we spend a lot of time doing data aggregation. Now, once the data is aggregated, it needs to be standardized. And once it's standardized, there's a process called as entity normalization that takes place, which I'll talk about a little more in detail. And these entities are law firms, judges, any of those connected data points across cases. Okay. Now, once the data is normalized, it can be stored in an analytical database. APIs make this data accessible, and then you can render it into dashboards and applications. Now, data aggregation. So if I can point the laser, okay. So this is a court case page from Los Angeles Superior Court, which happens to be one of the largest courts in the world in terms of the volume of cases that it handles. Okay. This is a typical case. This is public access. You'll see here, this is the case number, the name of the case, the filing court, filing date, case type, the status of the case. The information about the parties involved in the case. You'll see here on the left-hand side are all the parties and attorneys listed. You'll see the role of the party, defendant, plaintiff, and if you see somewhere here, you'll find an attorney, D. Luca Philip P., who's an attorney for plaintiff, but it does not mention for which plaintiff. Okay. Register of actions, what proceedings have happened, the dates, and the legal nomenclature for what's happened. Even though it's English, I mean, from a technical standpoint, there's a legal jargons and legal grammar to it. What documents were filed, on what dates. Now, this is the source. Okay? And from technical terms, we call this unstructured data. This is from one court, and if you went on from court to court to court, it just gets different. Every court is different. That's one level of data. Then you have all these documents that are filed in court, right? Complaints, the one you see on the left-hand side. This is what a typical complaint would look like. This is what a judgment would look like, right? So, you know, to build any product, the most important step for us is once you have this data accessed, to standardize it. And standardization is a process on its own because ultimately, it needs, no matter what the source is, it needs to be structured very well internally, right? I'm not sure how clearly you can see this, but this is typically a case object which is structured across courts would look like. You would have, from what you saw earlier, we would try to standardize this information as specific attributes, court, court location, case type, charges if it's criminal, when was the case filed, who the parties are, and the party would have its own object, which is very, it's quite structured on its own. So it would have the name split out if it's an individual, the party classification, whether it's an individual, whether it's a business, and then which attorneys represent that party, right? So once the data is standardized, it can be now visualized pretty easily. So this is how a dashboard for visualizing a case, no matter what source it comes from, can be done. So if you see here, this is very well structured. So from the typical research that you do, there's a lot of process that probably internally goes to just making it standardized. Okay. This is a case metadata information, the parties, attorneys, and which party is that attorney representing. The register of actions now comes in a very visualized form. So the first step is aggregation. The second step is standardization. Now comes the entity normalization. So let me talk a little bit more about this. So entity normalization is a process of identifying specific entities and clustering together different variations of the names or text to represent a real-world entity. Okay? And I'll try to explain this with an example. But the entities we identify, which are common across cases, are your lawyers, the same set that we saw earlier. Okay? Let me try to explain this with an example. Okay? Now, what you see here is Philip Paul DeLuca. Now, this is he's an attorney. This is a normalized entity with a specific identifier. Now, you'll see here, these are the different variations where this attorney has come in a lot of cases. Okay. Now, I had to limit the number of entries here because I didn't want the list to go beyond the presentation slide, but it can be a lot more. Okay. So let's try to see some of the problems that we try to solve for here. Misspellings. So if you see here, there's double L. If you see here, it's actually DeLuca, and there's no space here. And you'll see more and more problems as you see go down. Right? Inclusions of middle names. So the middle name is Paul, but if you see in various places, the middle name comes up there. Title, Esquire. Firm. So the firm name also comes up in the name. So this is how we end up seeing this information from the source, right? And the process by which we try to say that this is an actual individual in the real world entity, and this is that person, is the process of doing entity normalization. And so entity normalization is sort of the base for us to generate any analytics, for us to be able to provide tools so that research can be done in a whole different way than just a text-based research. Because now you can actually look up for this particular attorney with an identifier from a list of attorneys and try to find all the cases that that attorney has been involved in. So let me come to the challenges. Now, for us to generate analytics, we need data. And this data is hard to access, extremely hard. It depends from source to source. Sometimes it involves grabbing it by crawling this information. Sometimes it requires working with the courts. Sometimes it comes in data dumps. You'll see that even if you're looking at a case, some of that data will be in the HTML, in the browser that you see. Some of it will be in the PDF. So extracting all this information is extremely hard. The second, data voids. So even if we get the data, most of the time, the data is incomplete. So the amount of effort that we put in to collect the most complete data set is also a huge challenge. So this is the problem. This is one of the problems in data collection that we face. Now, challenges in normalization. Name inconsistencies. So you saw some misspellings previously. You'll see abbreviations come up. Name changes. Attorneys can go through name changes. Law firms can go through name changes. And all this has to be accounted for in the normalization process. confusing and transposing names. Now, if you see this here, Steptoe and Johnson Professional Liability, Limited Liability Corporation versus Steptoe and Johnson Limited Liability Partnership. These are two different entities. So if we try to use some algorithms to catch for misspellings, this can be accounted for as the same entity, but then we have to distinguish them as they are two separate entities. Michael and Associates, Michelle and Associates. Two separate entities, just one letter difference. Some other challenges. Entity inconsistencies. Now, if you see this law firm here, Eisner, this is how the firm is right now. But when it started in 2002, it was Michael Eisner. Okay. And in 2009, Frank joined the firm, and Kahan joined the firm. But Frank ended up leaving in 2011, and Gauri joined the firm. In 2013, Kahan left. Chapman, Ross, and Jeffy joined. So you see the amount of changes that happen. The firm goes through a lot of changes, right? How do we represent this? I mean, detecting this is one thing, but how do we represent this? If you're looking up for Eisner today, should all these change variations account for all the cases that have to be related? So law firms can merge. One law firm can split into three, while one firm retains the old name. Entities frequently split, merge, acquire other entities. Name changes due to partners' involvement. Their names may change in the process and may be related to previous entities. Different users may subconsciously make different assumptions when they use analytics. One other issue, when it comes to parties. Wells Fargo, huge conglomerate, right, has different entities involved. How do we represent this? Because when they are registered as separate entities, somebody might want to see it this way versus somebody who might want to see it from a Wells Fargo, the holistic way. Right? And trying to identify that they are actually a parent holding. So that brings us to sort of all the challenges, but what does the future of litigation analytics hold? So LLMs, large language models, are a huge game changer. GPT-3 is out there now. The way you can do machine learning has changed significantly over the last couple of years. Computing is getting extremely cheap. It's going down and down, right? The prices are going down. So training models is easier. Performing inference is easier. Data storage costs are going down. But there's a catch. Analytics is only as good as the underlying data. Normalization is not fail-proof. Data voids need to be considered. And over 70% of the time is spent on data cleansing and data preparation for ML. So in conclusion, easy accessibility to core data can ignite a lot of innovation in the legal tech. This can lead to an ecosystem of tools for lawyers, and it can bring in significant improvement in the justice system. With that, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any questions for our speaker today? I guess that's
Yes.
it. Yes, there is? Okay.
Thank you very much, Prashanth. Very interesting. The question is, because the problem is coming from data as, basic point. So what do you think about, how technology actually will help in eliminating or reducing the problem when it comes to data, especially, let's say, in pre-filtering exercise, including using blockchain or AI, that will be the first process, actually, to identify the data. I came across, actually, personally, towards certain contractual systems that will identify, certain issues in contracts that will tell you, using AI, that there is the problem in those clauses. Avoid them. Those clauses need to be incorporated based your policy or your standards. And I'm actually trying to implement that part in contract cycle. So for litigation and data gathering and collection, maybe it's not the same as easy as contracts because that will be at the start, it's not at the end. So if that's a solution that could identify those issues, with the pre-filtering system that will, we evaluate, and if you link this to if there is a centralized, let's say, database in the country, for example, in KSA, we have a national address. So if somebody changes his address, he needs to amend that within the system. Other than that, the national address will be recognized within data collection and for any case filing recognition. So just an example to be considered. So what do you think about that, Prashanth?
So if I understand your question correctly, how can you use AI or other systems in the pre-filtering process to identify problems that could probably exist? Yeah.
So what I'm doing as of now, that when there is a contract, okay, and there is, key words, it comes liability cap, okay? So the contract will tell you that this contract is exposing you to liability. So you need to monitor that. This contract is not addressing your standard templates, and he'll just, using the OCR, he'll bring your standard template or standard clause and bring it to the contract. You use this. Don't use that.
Yep.
So just an idea if that comes.
Yeah, I mean, using the applicability of technology in this different on the contract side of things is a whole different topic on its own versus this one. In here, we could definitely use some systems to identify what the voids are or where the problems are in the data. One of the things that we try to do is we know that we can never get a complete data set. And we know that normalization is not fail-proof, so we try to convey that in our solution to our customers. So let the customers make that decision of trying to understand how internally our systems work and try to adopt for it. For example, if we say this is one entity, and but we are not sure whether these two entities are the same one, we try to give some confidence scores in there for them to understand that. On the contract side also, I know there are several companies that use AI in sort of going through the contract and understanding where the problems are, or the typical template should be like this versus they are missing certain clauses there. So there are definitely places where AI can be used even in pre-processing to figure out problems, but that is not the solution, but to just recognize what problems do exist.
Then what do you think about then the automation actually of the platform? And one of the examples is to make sure that you have the e-platform that will contain all the stuff of the people, including their personal identifications, title deeds, addresses, so names. So all of that, when you have this connectivity related to this platform, so you can just generate from the actual resource and don't rely on other resources.
Oh, that would be perfect. I mean, that would be the ideal world to live in. I think one of the last points that I had put up on my slide was we spend 70% of our time in data cleansing. So if the data was accurate and readily available in one platform for us to use, I mean, the amount of innovation that could end up happening for building the necessary tools to make the legal system better or build better products would be huge. The cost of the product would also go down. Just imagine about that. Exactly. I mean, engineers are not cheap. ML engineers especially are expensive. So if we can reduce if the data consistency, standardization exists for us to build what products we can build, I mean, it would be a much better world to live in.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you very much.
Thank
and
you
by the way, lawyers
Prashanth.
are more expensive. Thank you.
Thank you, Prashanth. That was excellent. Thank you for all the insight.
Thank you,
Please put your hands together.